I'd like to introduce Dr. A.J. Tarpoff. He is our beef extension veterinarian at Kansas State University, and he's going to talk to us this evening about calf health, birth to branding.
Well, thank you very much, Rod, and sorry we couldn't be in person when we did this, but I think it's still a very useful tool to spread the information, be able to share this info. And today we're going to, talk about calf health, and going to look at this a number of different ways. But to me, from a veterinarian's perspective, kind of look at the whole system. Okay, we're going to start even prior to birth, during conception, during pregnancy, and follow the calf's health and its immune function as it goes through life until weaning. So how do we prepare these calves even before they're born? How do we prepare these calves while they're on the cow to ultimately give some robust abilities for these calves to handle certain situations like weaning later on in life? So let's jump right in. So this is the goal, right? So the goal is to really system-wide develop our calves that they're going to be successful, and they'll have some disease resiliency both immediately after birth, okay, while they're grazing and those opportunities they have during the summer months. But ultimately, we are beef producers, right? So the products that we sell are calves in the cow-calf sector, okay, but we are selling a valuable commodity for the next level, okay, and how they perform, how they develop, their immune function. All of this leads to a more successful beef product at the end of the day. So we'll kind of go through that system is what we'll talk about today. And I mentioned, building some resiliency. And I like to talk about calf resiliency and cow herd resiliency. And I think a good analogy is shocks. Okay, shocks on your pickup. Okay, I'm sure many of you might have an older pickup that you take out through a pasture, and every little bump just throws you all over the place. The shocks are worn out. We really don't have very good, really good shock absorbers in there. Now, with our calves, it's the same thing. Okay, every little insult, every little bump in the road, if they don't have a good shock absorber underneath them, they don't have a good set of springs, it's going to throw them off the path. Right? And that's our goal, is to build some good solid structure underneath these calves. So when there are bumps in the road, okay, if we do have weather insults like we had last week, we do have some of these issues that come about, that calf still stays on the track, okay, still stays in the road and can continue to move forward. So we're trying to build that, robust protection with a lot of absorption capacity to make sure that our calves are as resilient as possible. So we'll kick off with, where do we start? And in my mind, when we look at the full system, it's during pregnancy, okay? It's during pregnancy to get the calf. There's a lot of risk associated in the cow-calf industry. We need to have a fertile cow that's cycling appropriately. We need to have a fertile mating, whether that's through artificial insemination or natural cover with a bull. And we have a fertilization, we have a pregnancy, but there's a lot of issues that could happen that can interfere with that pregnancy. So we'll talk about that first. But ultimately, we get all the way up to calving. Okay, calving isn't always a given. We can have some issues around there. Newborn health problems can absolutely arise, especially if those of you that might have been calving last week, and all of a sudden we had newborn calves hit the ground when we have 8 inches of wet snow on the ground. Right, so there are some concerns there. We're going to talk about some of those early life issues and some things that we can combat, and we'll kind of keep going through the system. So pregnancy termination, right? I think this is a good place to start on some issues that we deal with trying to maintain the pregnancy all the way through. Okay, if anybody's had pregnant cows, occasionally we have a pregnancy termination. We might have an abortion that occurs. And I do like to bring out that there's a lot of different causes of bovine abortion, many of which are non-infectious. While I will discuss a lot more about some of the infectious agents, what we vaccinate against, what we try to protect against by utilizing those technologies, okay, but keep in mind, there's always a lot of non-infectious causes of abortion or pregnancy termination from just Mother Nature. Okay, there are some lethal genes that somehow got incorporated that it was not going to be a viable fetus. Okay, so the Mother Nature knows best and kicks off, kind of shuts down the pregnancy. But we do have some nutritional issues, okay, that occasionally pop up. And a good way to wrap your head around this is reproduction is a luxury. Okay, animals will always protect themselves if they are deficient or devoid of certain resources. Okay, if they're thin, if they're skinny, those are some situations where that cow, the mother, will actually protect herself before she'll protect that that growing and developing fetus. So while I will talk a lot more about it, infectious causes, we always have to keep in mind that there is a natural loss of pregnancy. And that's why with seldom we get 100% calf crop. Just Mother Nature sometimes kicks some of those out. So let's talk about the infectious causes. Okay, this is what this is what we protect against. This is what we set up our management programs to combat. And the infectious causes of abortion are multitude. We have viruses like IBR and BVD. We have bacterial issues that can interfere during different stages of pregnancy. And we also have some protozoal parasites that can even interfere with some of these problems. So it's not all just bacteria, not all just viruses, but usually if we're having some pregnancy issues, it can be a mixture of many of these things. And what we do to combat them is usually quite different. And just to illustrate this, this is some work that actually gets published out of our Kansas State Diagnostic Lab, that if there are bovine submissions to try to do an abortion workup, they keep track of that through the year. It's all anonymous, obviously, but they do try to give a general outlook on what the causes of abortion were the year prior. And this is a little bit older data. This is from 2019, but it was all compiled. That we do have viral insults, we have protozoal problems, we have nutritional or nitrate issues, some bacterial problems. So again, we have a lot of different things that can cause some insults in our cows. But what does this look like? Okay, how do we know if we're having a problem? And this is what we try to protect against, because it can be really devastating to an operation. In particular, some of our viral insults, viruses. We've been in a pandemic, 2 years ago, that virus, in the human population was rapidly spreading. Right. Well, we can have the same issue in our cows with some of these viruses like BVD and IPR. Okay, they can go through a cow herd, and depending on when they go through the cow herd, it can cause some pretty devastating results. With BVD, we can have big abortion storms. We can have a large percentage of our groups actually abort or terminate the pregnancy. We can even end up with some birth defects. And I won't go into it today, but we can actually have cattle that are born if the cow was exposed to the BVD virus during pregnancy. She can carry that fetus the full term and deliver a calf, but the calf, believe it or not, can be persistently infected with that virus. So that calf will actually be born viable, and it'll be alive, but as long as it's alive, it is shedding that virus, spreading it to all its other herd mates. So that's one way that disease potentiates itself, but that's one way that something we really try to prevent so we don't have long-term issues with it. IBR will have late-term abortions. We have third trimester cows getting ready for calving, and all of a sudden we start losing some of these calves in larger percentage late in gestation. So before their regular calving date, we end up having some of those losses. Then some of our bacterial issues. Okay, this is what we see on our vaccine lines. Okay, many of the vaccines, the cow vaccines we'll administer during the year, will have some type of product name, but then it'll say VL, VL5, VL3. Well, those V and L, that is Vibrio and Lepto. Vibrio is actually Campylobacter fetus, and it's actually a sexually transmitted disease. Okay, so it happens, that disease transfer actually happens at breeding. And what we end up with is very early embryonic losses. So what we see with Vibrio is not necessarily, abortion issues, but we end up with cycling cows. Okay, we have a successful breeding. All of a sudden, we have early embryonic death, and that cow cycles back. So we can have a pretty good percentage of our cows that are recycling, and usually we don't find out until preg check. So we're kind of behind the 8 ball, and it can really set back an operation when we have some of those problems. And then lepto, in different areas around, it's pretty regional that we'll have some lepto issues, usually contaminated water sources from some wildlife or some carriers in our cows, but can cause abortion issues, some mastitis problems, even infertility, that we can pick up some of those issues at preg check that don't have the preg check of what we should. That's where we start digging. But many times it's after the fact that we find out we have the problem. So how do we manage some of these diseases? What do we do to combat some of these losses? And it all starts with a herd management plan. Okay, and that begins with a good conversation with your local veterinarian to be able to come up with what the diseases, what the potentials are in the area, some different things like diagnostic testing, vaccinations. All of these have to do with working with your veterinarian. But there is some basic biosecurity that every cow-calf operation can implement to minimize some of these risk exposures. Okay, so part of that is just animal management. Trying to prevent the introduction of that disease. And where do we get disease introduction? Well, yes, we can have issues with fence line contact with other operations. We can have fence line contact. Maybe there's some stocker cattle or some backgrounded cattle right across the fence that might have some viruses floating through that herd. And remember, fence lines don't stop viral transfer. Okay, we've all seen the cows on the fence line that are nose to nose, and that's how we can easily transfer that just across a fence line. But one thing that always kind of pops up, and I like to bring it up, just as a simple reminder, what about graft animals? Okay, here we are in calving season. Now, we seldom bring in new animals to the operation, except what if we lost a calf and we bring in a sale barn calf or a calf from another operation that was a twin to graft onto our cow? Okay, because it's a good cow, lost a calf, no fault to her own. We bring in another calf. Well, that calf, even though it's not outwardly showing signs of disease, okay, it may potentially bring in some scour issues or other pathogens, and it kind of goes missed, okay, and we get a little complacent sometimes. Now, I fully understand why we would bring a graft calf in, or even a graft cow. We bring in another cow to have, might have a valuable calf. We bring in another cow to be able to nurse off of to get it up to weaning. Now, if you are going to implement a strategy like that, it is a good practice that if you're going to bring in either a graft cow or a graft calf, to segregate those animals for about 30 to 45 days. Whatever is shedding out of that new animal, it won't expose the rest of the herd. So that's just some good practice that if you are going to bring in an animal from another operation, especially during calving season, to make sure that we separate those animals for a period of time before we introduce them to the rest of the group. There might be some disease testing we might implement as well. Some of these might be on some of those new animals if we're trying to control certain types of diseases. A good example of that is trick. Okay, we'll trick test our bulls, making sure that our bulls that come in either didn't get exposed, because once a bull picks up trick, they're a lifelong carrier, and it can be pretty devastating to some of our breed-up breeds, causing some of that sexually transmitted disease and early embryonic death on some of those pregnancies. So that's a good thing that we'll test our bulls before we bring them on, especially if they're older or they're over 18 months of age. We'll go ahead and get those tested. And it's also good practice to trick test the bulls before the breeding season. We are getting relatively close to breeding. I know we're a couple of months out, but if there is a problem, it gives you time to be able to get rid of that animal and replace it before the upcoming breeding season. Now, I do have here, kind of highlighted, when do you call? Okay, when do you have an issue? Well, if you're in the middle and it's relatively normal, late gestation, that maybe have one of those, first calving animals that it might be stillborn. Okay, it occasionally happens, and it's not necessarily unexpected. But when do you call for help? And it's left up to each individual operator. But a good rule of thumb is if you're having abortion issues or pregnancy loss issues, okay, it's good to get the veterinarian involved as soon as possible. That if we do have some abortions, it's not necessarily the first one we start grabbing samples, but if you're having a cluster, if you're having more than one in a relatively tight time frame, it's a good idea to grab some samples. And that sample might be just grabbing the entire calf, but most importantly, even grabbing the placenta. So as that placenta passes, we have a much greater diagnostic ability to be able to tell you what the problem is at the lab if they have the calf tissues as well as that placenta that comes out. So if you do have concern, you have contact with your veterinarian wanting to send some samples in, those are the main samples that you would want to grab. It's the calf itself and also the placenta if you can grab it. All right, so we're going to fast track. We've made it all the way through gestation. Okay, we were able to get a fertile pregnancy, make it all the way through the gestation, protected against some of those diseases that can actually cause some of our abortion issues. We made it all the way up to calf, okay? And we get the calf on the ground. Obviously, the first thing that once that calf hits the ground, yes, getting the calf to breathe immediately is critical. But the next couple hours of life are really critical to the overall well-being and health of that animal and its overall productivity in its entire life. This early time frame, the first couple hours, is really important for colostrum. Okay, colostrum we don't have miracle drugs in veterinary medicine, but colostrum is about as close as it gets. Okay, and it's natural, right? It comes from mom. It has pre-made antibodies that are ready to combat any diseases or any pathogens that are in that environment. It truly is the mother's birthday present to that newborn calf. The calf has a functional immune system, but it's never been exposed to anything. So that's where this pre-made antibody, this passive transfer, really fills in the gap. And this colostrum will act as the active immune system for this newborn calf for the first couple months of life. That's really how important it is. So let's talk a little bit about colostrum. Okay, first and foremost, a lot of people have the question is how much colostrum does a calf really need? And if they're nursing off their mother, a good rule of thumb is about 10% of their body. And I know not every producer goes out and weighs their calves. A lot of our purebred operators will, and that's very valuable information. But, a good rule of thumb is 10% of body weight. But what does that equate? Well, on average, it's about a gallon. Okay, about a gallon of quality colostrum coming from that cow to be ingested by that calf within the first couple hours. That's the adequate amount to allow that passive transfer that they need for good protection. Now, there are some misperceptions out there about time frames, and I'm sure many of you have heard 24 hours. You have 24 hours to get colostrum into a calf, and that's a little bit incorrect, okay? Now, the gut lining, when that calf is born, its gut is actually permeable. Antibodies and these immunoglobulins that are passing into the calf to give immune protection, they're big cells, and they can't absorb through an older, a mature gut lining. So early in life, it's actually permeable. So these big cells can float straight across the gut lining and get into the bloodstream where they're active. But that gut closure begins soon after birth. Okay, and it happens in kind of a very repeatable time frame. That yes, it's true that the gut closure happens around 24 hours of life. However, it happens over time. So by 9 hours, we have 50% closure. And what that tells us is if they consume colostrum after that 9-hour period, it's very inefficient. So whatever they do consume is less efficient getting into the bloodstream. So what we do recommend is really the first 2 to 4 hours of life, preferably before 6 hours of life, is where we get the most efficient absorption of those colostral antibodies that get into that calf's bloodstream that provides protection. Okay, so 2 to 4 hours of life, about a gallon of colostrum. Okay, that's kind of what we're after. Now, if that doesn't happen, okay, what are the impacts? Well, the impacts can be pretty extreme. Those animals that it's called failure of passive transfer, if they don't get the adequate amount of colostrum, or it's too late, we're a little bit late to the ball game, those animals are much more likely to get sick. I have here about 6.5 times more likely to get sick as a neonate, usually with either calfhood scours, or we can have navel ill, or we'll have infection of the cord itself. So we can have some of those problems. Even pre-weaning, once they're out on grazing, they're out in summer pasture, they're over 3 times more likely to get sick and 5 times more likely to die. Okay, so we seldom think about colostrum as being this critical importance, but it really is on the health and well-being. And this actually transfers over to the next level, whether they're being retained as a replacement heifer or go to the feedlot. They're much more likely to grow less, more likely to get sick. It is truly a lifelong impact on what happens the first couple hours of life. Now, we are in the middle of calving season, or for those that haven't quite started, it's getting close. Okay, what happens if we don't have colostrum? Something happened to the cow. Calved during a storm, like last Thursday, cow calves, the calf was cold, you had to pick it up, carry it back to the barn to get it warmed back up, and all of a sudden, we are responsible for delivering the colostrum to that calf. What are our options? What are the concerns there? And when we start looking at colostrum replacement, we have some decisions to make. Ideally, we could harvest that colostrum from the mother. She's built those antibodies from what she's been exposed to in that environment. If she has a good udder, we can get her in. We can be able to milk that out, and provide that colostrum to the baby calf. But sometimes we don't have that availability. So what do we use? Our typical go-to is some of our commercial products that are available. They're freeze-dried products, usually come in a little plastic pouch. And I will warn you that they're fantastic products. They work very well, but there are two different types of products on the market. We have replacers and we have supplements. And there is a price difference, okay? The replacer products are about double the price of the supplements, and that's for good reason. The replacer products truly are a total replacement for the colostral intake for that animal. So they're usually what our goals are with the replacer is on the bag, you'll see a number of grams of IgG. And our goal for a good quality replacer product is 100 grams or greater of IgG or immunoglobulin. That's the amount of antibody in that product. And that's what we would consider a quality replacement. Now, the supplements have about half of that. Supplement is truly just what that bag reads. It's a supplement. That's for an animal you might be concerned about the quality or quantity that they might be consuming already. So this would be for a calf that's already up and suckling, has already gotten some colostrum, but maybe you have concern about the udder. You're concerned about, if they got everything they needed. So to give a added booster, that's where we would give some of those supplemental products. Now, fresh or frozen. Okay, fresh or frozen products. What if you have a neighbor down the road that you might be able, hey, they have some saved up frozen colostrum. That's much lower down on the list that we would jump at utilizing, and because bringing in fresh or frozen colostrum from another operation is a potential disease transfer. Okay, just through something as simple as as a gallon of colostrum, we potentially could introduce diseases to our operation that our animals don't have. Johne's disease, bovine leukosis virus, that can be transferred early in life through colostrum. So we typically refrain from that. That's kind of a last ditch situation that we assume those risks, but we would much rather either harvest or give something from our own operation, use a commercial product, and much further down the list is bring in a colostrum product, fresh or frozen, from another operation. Okay, so that's kind of where we place those. Now, I will say that not all colostrum, not all cows produce the same amount of colostrum, okay? And this is a very, very tight, it's tied very closely to the nutritional status of the cow. Age and nutritional status is what really gives us the good quality colostrum. So think about our middle-aged or mature cows. They have a fully functional, very effective immune system. Because of that, they're able to create a higher quality and quantity of colostrum. So kind of as it goes through our age of our animals, our middle-aged mature cows, they have the highest quality. Our young heifers on the other end of the spectrum, unfortunately, those young heifers, keep in mind their immune system isn't quite fully mature yet. Okay, and this is the first time that system has pulled those antibodies and concentrated them into colostrum. So due to those factors, and usually the udder development isn't quite as good as some of our mature animals, so the milking ability might be a little bit lower. Just due to those factors, inherently, heifers might have a little bit lower quality, as we look at the entire herd. But body condition, this is kind of the critical piece. Okay, how much fat cover do our cows have going into calving? And that is kind of one of the number one indicators on quality and quantity of some of this colostrum that our calves consume. Once in a body condition score of 1 to 9, 1 being so skinny they can barely stand up, or 9 that they're so fat they can't fit on a trailer. So those are the two extremes. We don't see those two extremes, but we do see some variation in the middle. Okay, what we shoot for during calving is having our cows in a body condition score of 5 or above. 5 to 6 is kind of our overall goal. If they're a little bit on the skinny side, okay, that's where we can start having some of these problems. Okay, here's a graph from some older data showing the body condition score on the bottom, and going up, that's just the level of immunoglobulin that's actually in those animals. Now, what we see is the lower the body condition score, if we have some of those skinny cows, 3s and 4s, they will have a lower density of those immunoglobulins in the colostrum. So just keep in mind that it's year-round effort. We can't short those cows during gestation. Making sure that we keep them in a critical body condition score really helps out passing that immune transfer onto the newborn calf. So let's move on to some of the early life concerns. Okay, we talked about colostrum, but what about some of these other issues? Okay, what about delivery of some of these calfsicles? Okay, it happens last year. If anybody was calving during the cold snap in February, knows exactly what we're talking about. The calves were getting cold stressed soon after they came through the womb. We're going to have some cold days here this week that potentially we can have some cold calves. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I do get quite a few questions on cold stress and how do we warm up these calves? What's the most effective? And one thing I challenge all of our producers to do is one of the biggest indicators on when these calves need help is carry a rectal thermometer. Just the little, the little battery operated thermometers you can buy at the drugstore. Have one of those on hand. But one of our biggest indicators on when these animals need to get warmed up is a rectal temperature. Okay, you can take that rectal temperature, and that'll kind of gauge and give you a good bearing on how much help this newborn calf actually needs. Okay, and it'll help distinguish if the calf is really dopey or sick, or if it truly is chilled in what we call hypothermic or low body temperature. Normal temperature for a calf is generally about 101 and a half. Once we start getting below 100 degrees Fahrenheit, we will start showing some symptoms of hypothermia. Okay, what happens is the body actually pulls blood flow from the extremities and keeps the core warm. Okay, it goes into kind of a defense mechanism where it keeps the internal organs warm and blood flowing to them, and it also keeps blood flowing to the brain to keep the animal viable. So we can see things like frozen ears or frozen tails. Well, that's due to the body's ability that it constricts and it pulls blood back into the core to keep them warm. Okay, we see severe symptoms, where they'll almost be flat out once we get below the mid 90s. We can still have viable calves even into the high 80s. They kind of go into a comatose state once they get into the high 80s body temperature, 86, 87. Some of those animals can be returned. It takes quite a while. But again, some of those animals that are comatose, that are severely hypothermic or very cold, they may only breathe once a minute. And so oftentimes it's try to warm up all calves until they give us a reason not to. Okay, if they're no longer viable or they have passed, but it can creep up on us. So if you've got a cold calf that was born into a snowbank, it might be incoherent, non-responsive. We can still warm up quite a few of those calves. What are the options? A lot of options on warming up calves. All of them are effective. Okay, so I'll go through, talk about some of those and some pros and cons of all of them. The old tried and true, the floorboard defroster in the pickup. Right, it blows hot air, around the floorboard, keeps our feet warm. We can throw those calves on the floorboard of the passenger side of the pickup. One thing I like to do is take a little cardboard box and just cut it into an L, so I can lay that over top of them, and it kind of blocks their feet from getting stuck underneath the seat, which is nice, and it circulates that warm air in that location, so it can dry them up and warm them up pretty quick. You can throw them in the floorboard. You can drive around, finish doing your feeding and your checking. I also like that cardboard because if they start getting a little rowdy and they start trying to open the door or the window, you can kind of put your hand on top of them to keep them where they're at. So very effective means. Heating lamps and blankets. Okay, warm blankets, bring them into the barn, wrap them in the blanket, protect them from the frozen ground, have some heat lamps above them. Again, very effective. Keep in mind that the hair is still insulated. Okay, so it takes a little bit longer to pass that heat through that kind of cold skin and hair to be able to get inside the body. So it does take a little bit longer. If you are going to use heating lamps, there is a fire risk. Okay, I like to point out there's some really nice new heating lamps that are spark free that greatly reduces the chance if those animals get up and start getting a little rowdy that they're not going to knock over a lamp and potentially cause a fire. So that's always something to keep an eye on. Next on the list is warm water immersion. Who's had a calf in the bathtub trying to warm them up, right? Warm water immersion is very effective. Okay, they've done some studies years ago that they took hypothermic calves, they chilled them down, and then they tried all these different methods to warm them up. All of them were effective. The warm water immersion did bring back the body temperature quickest, okay, out of all those options. Now, I bring that up because, yes, it is the quickest, but it is very labor intensive, okay? The proper way to use warm water immersion is we don't want to overheat those animals. So we start with lukewarm water and we slowly increase that water temperature to maintain that water temperature just a little over 100 degrees. Okay, we're trying to get it up to regular body temperature. If we do that too quickly, if we just put them into very hot water immediately, we can actually have cold shock. And what happens is the cold blood that's kind of still in the limbs shunts back to the heart, and it can actually stop the heart. So we do have to slowly warm these animals up in that water. Just think of it as the calf as an ice cube. That we put an ice cube in a cup of water. Well, that ice cube starts to melt, and it changes the temperature of the water. So we constantly have to add in warmer water and warmer water to keep the temperature regulated. Now, after we do warm water immersion, we still have to thoroughly dry those animals. So that's where some more of the labor-intensive activity happens. Is yes, we get them warmed back up, but then we need to get them dry. So getting that animal dry is just as important as getting it warmed back up. There are some cool warming boxes that are commercially available. I've seen some producers actually create some of these warming boxes as well. Very, very inventive. They circulate warm air in that confined area, but they do need to breathe. Okay, so we need to let loose some of that moisture. So we never have them in a confined box. We do need to let out some of that humidity as we warm those calves back up. Regardless of the way that you warm them up, it takes time. Okay, so this is where the labor comes in. Regardless of how you warm them up, you're still looking at 1 to 2 hours to properly warm these calves from a mild or severe hypothermic event. So it does take time. So take your time, do it correctly, monitor with the rectal temperature. Okay, take the body temperature so you have a better idea of where they're at. So we don't have to go too far, but then we can get them dried, we can get them warmed back up. Now, colostrum. Typically, if we have a hypothermic calf that was born and never stood up, we want to warm them up first before we administer the colostrum. Colostrum, it does have better absorption at that regular body temperature. So we will warm them first, then supply that colostrum. And the time frame on that, well, one good thing is a hypothermic calf, its gut closure actually slows down. So we do have time to be able to warm them up before we administer that. So take your time and do it correctly, but we can have pretty good results. Other newborn issues. Okay, I do like to bring up, there's a couple of high-risk situations that some of these calves might need a little extra help soon after birth. Okay, so that's why I try to bring it up. Some of these high-risk newborns might need tubed, might need a little extra care to get up and going. First of which, they're covered in a yellow goo. Okay, so think back if you've ever seen a calf that's born with this yellow mucus-covered stuff that's all over the calf. And the picture here is meconium. Meconium is actually the waste products from that calf inside the uterus. In a very stressful calving situation where there's a lot of movement of the calf, we can have breakage of that meconial sac. So when the calf is covered in this meconium, this waste product, that means it was a very stressful calving. Okay, so that might be a key factor that kind of trip in your brain that stressful calving, this one might need a little extra help. The second is suckle reflex. Okay, I'm sure many people have been around a bottle calf that you walk into the pen and it latches onto your thumb and sucks away. That's a very rigorous suckle. Now, these newborn calves, they still have a suckle reflex. So something we'll do to measure that, to kind of measure the vigor of these newborn calves, if they're going to have the ability to get up and suckle like they should, is, well, we can take our finger and place it on the inside of the mouth and kind of drag it on the top side of the palate. They should have a rhythmic suckle, good jaw tone with a rhythmic. It's not going to be as vigorous as that bottle calf, but they should have a rhythmic, good jaw tone. If there's no rhythm, no jaw tone, chances of that calf getting up and suckling on its own is pretty slim. So we might intervene in an earlier time with those. The next one, exaggerated withdrawal. Okay, so this one's a little interesting. This is you might be intervening, trying to help deliver the calf. The feeder sticking out. You reach up and grab onto one of the hooves of the calf to help deliver it through the birth canal. You grab onto the hoof, and that calf, while it's still inside the cow, rips its foot out of your hand. Okay, some people it's like, oh, it's a big strong calf ready to come out. That's incorrect. It's actually a very stressful calf. There's been a lot of neural stimulation on that calf that is yet to be delivered. They have that exaggerated reflex, that very strong pullback. That means that calf is stressed. The time is of the essence to be able to deliver that calf on time. Okay. Then obviously swollen head or swollen tongue. Contact your veterinarian. There's some different products that we might have to utilize to pull some of that fluid out to make sure we don't occlude the airways. Okay, so work with your veterinarian on that, but those would be emergency calves as well. Next on the list, some of you may have read this in some different articles in popular press that the Madigan squeeze. Okay, I've had several questions on that over the past handful of months or so, so I thought it'd be a good idea to go ahead and cover it. The Madigan squeeze, if anybody has horses, might have heard about it. This is it was developed for dummy foals. Okay, and it's kind of a situation where we have foals that come out and they're viable, but they're very depressed, very lethargic, nothing outwardly disease or wrong with them. They're very dumbed down. That's why they call them dummy foals. And sometimes we see some calves that are very similar to this. There's been some research that was done on foals, and the same mechanisms potentially can happen with cattle. Is as the calf comes through the birth canal, while it's in utero, there are these neural steroids that keep the brain kind of almost asleep. So the calf doesn't move around in utero. It might bump and move a little bit, but again, it kind of keeps them sedated, so to speak. Now, during the normal calving process and the squeezing and the neural stimulation of going through the birth canal, that's supposed to down-regulate those neural steroids. There are some situations where that might not occur, either due to a C-section, a very quick calving. Regardless of the situation, we still end up with elevated neural steroids in the brain that keeps them kind of a dummy calf, so to speak. So this technique was developed with just a rope to kind of mimic the pressure of the chest and the blood restriction of just kind of the squeezing technique. Has really helped with some of those dummy foal situations. And I know quite a few veterinarians that implement this strategy on calves as well, especially with some of the calf growing operations and calf ranches. They'll routinely use this technique. What it is you take I use a nylon soft rope, and have a hondo on it, and we loop that hondo in between the front legs, and we pull that knot up behind the shoulders on the withers. So we have the initial loop, and then we throw 2 half hitches in that. And what we do is we just pull backwards and give constant pressure that it just kind of squeezes the chest. We keep that pressure on for about 20 minutes. And it almost sounds like voodoo magic, okay? But the calf goes into this weird, like, comatose state. It's kind of like rubbing a puppy's belly. They just kind of roll over and kind of go into a trance. These calves do the same thing. They feel that pressure. They just kind of sit down, roll over, and they are they're in this like weird comatose sleep state. After about 20 minutes, you don't have to hold the rope the entire time. You can tie it off to a post or something else, but you just leave the sustained pressure on that calf. Pull it off, and more often than not, those animals about a minute after you take it off, they just pop right up. It kind of gives them a vigorous energy. It's kind of strange. Now, this isn't going to solve every problem, but if you are going to utilize the technique, it's do no harm. You're not going to do anything negative on that calf whenever you're doing the squeeze appropriately. Not all animals need it, okay? But if you're going to use it, it's about 2 days old or younger is some that we'll use, possibly C-sections or suckle reflex, lethargic and weak calves. Obviously, if they're scouring and they have other issues, this isn't going to help. But some of those occasional dummy calves, it might be something to try. Now, I mentioned scours, and I think that's a good kind of prelude that, we got through calving, importance of colostrum. We moved into some of the early issues with hypothermia, getting the calves warmed up, possible dummy calves that, you might try the Madigan squeeze technique. But early in life, the main disease potential is scours. Okay, it's neonatal diarrhea. That diarrhea that can occur with scours, it's not all the same. Sometimes we have bacterial issues. Sometimes we have viral issues. We have protozoal issues. In most cases, it's a mixture between several of these. We have more than one virus. We have a virus and we have crypto. But one interesting piece is outside of salmonella, the rest of these, all of our cattle operations have. Okay, the cows, they circulate them at very low levels. They're kind of natural, ubiquitous pathogens that circulate at a low level. They don't cause issues on our cows, but really they do circulate. And typically, whenever we run into scour issues, we're dealing with scour issues on our youngest calves. Okay, the ones born in the last third of the calving season. And we'll talk about why that is. Now, age of scouring is pretty helpful whenever we're dealing with some of these problems. Usually the first week of life, very soon after birth, we might have some E. coli problems that go through, either they consume it, it goes through the navel, we have navel ill issues, we might run into some E. coli scours soon after birth. But most of the scouring issues are about a week to 3 weeks of age is where we run into most of our issues. And this is rotavirus, coronavirus, and cryptosporidium. Now that's where we see most of our issues is in that couple week time frame. But again, our treatment for many of these are all the same, and we'll talk about treatment here in a second. But it's first let's talk about management, and then we'll talk a little bit about treatment on how to maintain and how to properly assess some of these scouring calves. Now, scours can be prevented, okay, through management. Now, our mainstay of prevention, true prevention, is kind of twofold. Number one is basic sanitation. Okay, trying to have newborn calves delivered in a relatively clean environment. Now we can't disinfect dirt. Okay, so that's not what I mean. But where our animals move or spend the vast majority of our time, we have a herd of animals. They spend most of their time in 3 different locations: where they eat, where they drink, and where they rest. Okay, and especially during cold nights, they rest in the same general location that has good protection. Well, during the calving season, they build up a lot of pathogens. Just think about whenever you go to get cows up first thing in the morning, they stand up, they stretch, and what do? They defecate or urinate. And that's where a lot of these pathogens can spread, is through some of that buildup of manure and urine during the calving season. Now, what can we do to help manage some of that? Well, we can feed in different locations. Okay, so instead of just feeding in the same location where manure builds up during the entire calving season, potentially we can move that to different locations within the calving area. So we can feed in different locations, possibly. And one thing I really like is kind of mobile shelters. So we can actually hook on to the back of the tractor and maybe drag the shelter to a new location. So we can kind of move those loafing areas through a calving pattern. So those are potentials that we can do if you use bedding, constantly cleaning and removing that bedding and putting new out to remove some of that pathogen load. All of that is scours management. Okay, it all goes a long way. But one of the pieces that we often forget about is how these pathogens build. Okay, yes, it happens. It circulates in the cows, builds up in the manure. But the reason we run into issues in our younger calves is our older calves, the ones that are born early in the season, actually act as disease amplifiers. So they get exposed to a very low amount. They replicate these pathogens, these viruses, these bacteria or protozoa. They replicate them and they shed it all over the place, but they don't actually come down with diseases. So they never hit that critical threshold. But what that happens is that means they amplify the pathogens exponentially in that area. So it's older calves is one of our biggest threats to the young calf disease potential. So any way that we can potentially separate older calves from young calves can be very beneficial in controlling scours. And those two management pieces, understanding how that disease occurs, are the basis behind the Sandhills calving system. Now, the Sandhills calving system, It's not going to work on every operation, but the principles behind them can. Okay. And that those principles are the solution to pollution is dilution. Okay. So we're just going to dilute the pathogens to a greater area so we don't have the buildup. And this is kind of how it's done. They start with calving all their cows in one location, one paddock, calf for 2 to 3 weeks. Anything that's still pregnant and hasn't dropped their calf, you move to the next location. So they calve, so we're separating calf by age by about 2 to 3 weeks. And then the next born, they're separating the calf by age, but they're also calving in a relatively clean environment. So that's kind of how it's the theory behind it. But really, anything we can do to decrease the pollution, to spread that out over a larger area, and break the amplification cycle by separating calf by age, all of these are scour management techniques. So it can look a lot of different ways. A lot of producers might calve close to facilities, close up to the house. They're easy to check. Yeah, completely understand that. So there's other things to be able to separate pairs. We can move pairs out to different locations, kind of around that calving area to try to separate those calves by age. Just anything to minimize that overall contamination during the calving season, right? So some basic rules of thumb on treatment of calf scours. Okay, anybody that's raised calves for cows for any length of time has run into some scouring calf issues. And the biggest threat, the biggest killer of calves that have scours is dehydration. Okay, so dehydration is what we really try to manage. So fluid therapy, oral electrolytes and fluids, that's the mainstay of treatment. Okay, so if they still have a warm tongue, still have a moist mouth, it means they're probably still up and nursing. We can give some added oral electrolytes a couple times a day to be able to supplement that animal, maintain its hydration status. Now, if that animal is down, kind of comatose, severely lethargic, wet rump all the way down, those animals, they're a critical case. And if they've gotten to that point, they really need to get into your local veterinarian, have some IV fluids administered. We can administer those warm fluids to be able to bring those calves, really change their hydration status. And it's amazing how much fluids they actually need. We're talking 5-10 liters of fluid just to be able to get the animal back close to its hydration status. So it's critical to do that as quickly as possible. Now, for your own well-being and human safety, some of those pathogens that I talked about can cause diseases in people, especially if you have if yourself or some of the people in your household might be, compromised, even soiled clothing and things like that you bring back in the house potentially can expose those people. So if you're having a scours outbreak, if you're having 2 or more calves involved, it might be worthwhile just for the well-being of yourself and your family to take added precaution, have some diagnostic samples taken so you know exactly what pathogen is involved. So you know when to take those extra precautions. Okay, so that's kind of calfhood, getting them through the meantime. I mean, we talked a little bit about vaccines, and I've got some good data from some surveys from cow-calf veterinarians all through the United States. And we'll go through some of this information. What's recommended? When is it recommended? What do we use for cows? What do we use for calves? And some of those time frames. So let's discuss that a little bit. And I like to start with the big picture. Okay, the big overarching theme. Why do we vaccinate cows? Mature cows in a cow-calf system, why do we bother vaccinating? And the real reason is it's insurance. Okay, we're trying to protect pregnancy from some of those disease insults. We're also trying to build the immune response and the immunity to be able to pass on to the calf. So that's why we vaccinate cows. We're protecting against the big potential losses. If BVD comes through, it can be a couple of years before things get cleaned up. And they can be devastating. So we use these vaccines as tools for overall protection against those big potential losses. Okay, why do we vaccinate calves? Well, we vaccinate calves for a different reason. Many times it's against some of the same pathogens as the cows that we utilize for the cows, but we do it to protect against pneumonia. Okay, calf hood pneumonia, BRD, bovine respiratory disease. That's the main threat as that calf transitions to through the cow-calf sector. Once we get closer to weaning, that's where the big transfer is, changing from scour issues to respiratory disease issues, and that's what we're trying to protect against in those young developing calves. Now, vaccines, keep in mind, this is one of my another analogies. They're just a tool in the toolbox. Okay, we have to have realistic expectations on what these vaccines do, what they protect against, and what kind of where they fit. No vaccine is 100% effective and will prevent everything. Okay, if we expose or we stress animals enough, they can always succumb to disease. And that's where I use this analogy. I had a breakdown on a piece of machinery on I think it was my mower, and I was prying on something. Of course, I ran over a stump, but I took the biggest screwdriver I had, and I'm sitting there prying on this piece of metal on the mower deck, and long and behold, my screwdriver broke, and I slammed my fist up against the metal, and I'm bleeding, and my first thought was, oh, this cheap screwdriver, with probably some other words in there, but you get the point. I broke the screwdriver, and I immediately go to, well, this screwdriver was cheap, wasn't made appropriately. Then it dawned on me, well, that's not really fair. I really should have been using a pry bar, what it was developed to do. I was using a screwdriver to do a job that it was never developed to do. Okay, and similarly, we have to use vaccines for what they were designed to do and the time frames that they're designed to be used to get that maximum benefit. Okay, so realistic expectations when it comes to vaccines. Some of our general guidelines with vaccination. Number one, we need a functional immune system to get a good response. That's how these are developed. That's what they were designed to do. It's a challenge to the immune system. We use a vaccine, we challenge the immune system responds and develops protection, and that takes time. Okay, that also tells us is it's not immediate. We do need to time our vaccinations prior to the exposure or prior to the threats to get the maximum benefit. So what does that look like in the system? Well, for our cows, typically we're trying to match our production and match the utilization of these products when we're already handling these animals, right? So pre-breeding, okay, this is getting ready for turnout. We're going to go and replace ear tags. We're going to go be doing some different things, taking down different information, running them through the chute before they go out to summer grass. This pre-breeding time before exposure to before AI, yes, that's a prime opportunity. If we can time that for 30 to 45 days prior to the breeding season, we can get some of our vaccines in to protect against some of those issues that can cause early embryonic losses. When's the next time we usually have our cows in? And it's usually at preg check. There might be some products that we can use at preg check as well. Calves, a little bit different. Usually the first time we try to implement some of our animal health products and some of our management strategies would be pretty close timed with our pre-breeding vaccines for our cows. This is what we refer to as branding time. Whether you brand or not, it's just kind of a time frame. Calves are 2, 3, 4 months old. We're getting them through the chute for the first time. We have an opportunity to do some of our management strategies and implement some of the vaccines that we'll use. Next most important time will probably be pre-weaning. If we want to build antibodies prior to exposure or prior to stressors, we do have to timeline that to make sure that we have the added benefit of using time to our advantage, not trying to catch up. So that's where pre-weaning can really go a long way to boost that immunity prior to that big stressor of weaning. So what do we use? That's the time frames. Okay, usually pre-breeding, possibly preg check for cows, for the calves, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's start with the cows. Okay, pre-breeding. Okay, many of our products that are out there, they will have some viral components, and they'll also have bacterial components. We'll have IBR, usually a couple of different strains of BVD, so that there's 3 viral pieces. And usually they also have PI3 and BRSV. So it's usually a 5-way viral, okay, but also with the addition of Vibrio and Lepto. This is where you will see the 5-way plus BL5, BL3. The V again is Vibrio, and that's the issue that we can have some early embryonic death. Lepto can cause some problems throughout gestation. But in the 5 is how many strains of lepto we would have in that product. So that's generally what's recommended pre-breedings, to have some of our 5-way virals plus Vibrio and lepto is kind of a goal that we would utilize. What about preg check? Okay, preg check, we might have the opportunity to give a lepto booster if regionally, if your local veterinarian recommends that. We also have opportunity to potentially use scour preventative vaccines. So we vaccinate the cows to build antibody to then transfer to the young calves through the colostrum. Depending on the label, sometimes it's 3 to 6 weeks prior to calving. If it's a little bit longer than that, we are still going to have some added benefit of circulating antibody that makes it into colostrum. So again, if it's recommended, that might be a product utilization that you would give at preg check to help some of that immune transfer go into the baby calves. Just so you all know that I'm not just speaking for my own recommendations. We actually conducted a nationwide survey asking practitioners, cow-calf veterinarians, what they recommend. Okay, so you're not just hearing it from me, but you're seeing consensus on what is recommended within the industry in our veterinary communities. Okay, and from that, the annual booster for the female herd, generally pre-breeding, is, long and behold, IBR, BVD, okay, and some of our other PI3 and BRSV, so our 5-way viral, with addition of lepto and Vibrio. Okay, so we kind of have our 5-way plus Vibrio lepto. That's the main recommended annual booster. Other questions that come up is, do we use modified live? Do we use killed? 65% of responding veterinarians did recommend a modified live yearly annual booster for cow herds. Okay, but again, that comes down to your local veterinarian and what they recommend, because they understand your management system. So some products might be better suited to your operation than others. Scour prevention. Okay, yes, 80% of veterinarians did recommend a scour preventative vaccine to the cows. That would usually have either protection against E. coli, corona, rotavirus, to protect against some of those scour issues early in life. Now, calves. Calves are a little bit different. Those are vaccines on the cow side. Now let's transition to talk about what we want to protect against for our young developing calves. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a change in threat from calf scour to bovine respiratory disease, pneumonia. Okay, a lot of different causes of pneumonia. It's a mixed bag, dealing with stress, dealing with different viruses, dumb down the immune system, cause immunosuppression, allows the bacteria to get in to cause these lung issues. Okay. Now I know this is a busy screen, but I'll kind of walk you through. This is the development of the calf's immune system. Okay, and it begins all the way back at conception. All the way through gestation, we are developing that calf's immune system. But let's look right here. Soon after birth, okay? Soon after birth, we have very low levels of functional immune system. They have all the pieces of the pie, but the immune system is kind of like a muscle, okay? It's like your bicep. If you can't use your arm, or your arm's in a sling and it's never been stressed in a long time, you lose all the strength of that muscle. Well, a newborn calf, it's never had to flex that muscle before. So inherently it's very weak, but that's where colostrum comes in, and we have passive immunity that's very high. But that passive immunity doesn't last forever. Those antibodies start to decrease over time, and at the same time, this is where our active immune system, the calf itself, is developing its own protection. Okay, so that window of susceptibility also kind of hits right around our branding time. That it's a prime time to stimulate the immune system prior to that dip in immune function. Okay, so let's talk more about that. Again, completely naive at birth, never been stressed, never been exposed. It was born from the calf, the cow, never been exposed to the outside pathogens. It's delivered into the environment. It has to have the colostrum, but they start to decrease. So the calf's own immune function really starts to take over about 5 to 6 months of age. So if we stimulate that just prior, we get a pretty good primer for later in life, that we build memory protection of that calf's immune system. Now that immune system, there's kind of the things we assume help, right? Nutrition, environment, vaccination. We can help booster and stabilize that immune system. But we have to keep in mind maturity. Maturity is absolutely necessary. We have calves today that grow faster and develop quicker than we ever have, right? It's really successful. The immune system does not grow at that same rate. The immune system development is constant. So regardless of what we do with performance, things like that in calves, when we still have to have maturity, and it can take up to 2 years of age for a calf to fully develop its immune system. So most of our feeder cattle, especially, are already harvested to create beef before they've ever, before the time frame that they've ever developed their full immune protection. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. Now, stress, I lump stress into everything that hurts our immune function. Okay, if we have poor nutrition, we have inclement weather issues, we have management things like castration, dehorning, weaning, transportation. All of these things are stressors. Okay, if we lump too many of these stressors together, we will still have disease, regardless if we use a lot of vaccines, if we do some other things. If we lump too many stressors together, they're additive. It can always cause disease. So here's that just visualize, is we're trying to decrease and reduce the compounding stressors all at the same time. So even if we vaccinate, if we wean and we ship and we commingle and we change feed and we castrate and we dehorn, that always leads to the potential of still causing disease. A well-vaccinated herd can still have disease issues post-weaning. We don't separate some of these stressful events. So one question I get pretty regularly is, Doc, how young can I start vaccinating my cattle? Do I need to do anything at birth? I'm kind of a minimalist. Don't necessarily, I do pretty minimal at birth. Might, in some circumstances, due to the region, might have to utilize some products. But typically when we start our vaccination, it's at that branding time. Okay, it's at that 2 to 4 months of age. There's actually some new data that's been published, really well-run studies that show we can have very good immune response to some of these vaccines as little as 1 month of age. So with our modified live viral products, there's a lot of those that we can get very good response as early as 1 month of age. In face of maternal antibody and everything else, we can still build very good memory protection. So again, work with your veterinarian for some of those recommendations. So when do we vaccinate? We talked about time frames for the cows, pre-breeding, maybe preg check. What about our calves? Well, branding time. Mentioned it several times. That's a really important time. That's when the colostral antibodies are dropping. It gives us the ability to help booster those calves up. 3 to 4 months of age. And yes, that's a prime time to start stimulating that immune system. Pre-weaning is kind of the next most important piece, so we get the most bang for our buck. Some operations may not handle the animals pre-wean. And as long as we decrease the stress enough, even though weaning can be stressful, potentially we would have a booster at weaning. Our goal is to have 2 doses by the time the animal leaves the operation. Branding, and then at pre-weaning or weaning. Okay, so 2 rounds into these animals. But what do we vaccinate against? Okay, a little bit different than our cows. We still go after our 5-way viral. Okay, these viruses are the same types of viruses we utilize on the cow side to help give some of that protection. Those viruses, IBR and BVD, can cause reproductive issues in the cows. They also cause respiratory problems in our calves. So we will have a 5-way viral that we try to administer. We also protect against clostridial diseases. Clostridial diseases, they're everywhere. They live in the soil. We think about blackleg, tetanus, and all of those Clostridium perfringens causes purple gut in calves, rapidly growing calves. So that 7-way or 8-way, we even have 9 ways now. But those are the Clostridial, our traditional blackleg product that our calves don't have protection against. And they will have exposure out grazing. They are near dirt, they will have exposure. So we will try to get a blackleg on board. Now, not all blacklegs, not all 7 or 8 ways have tetanus. So if you're going to be banding, if you're going to be dehorning, if you're going to be doing some of those other situations, don't forget about tetanus. make sure that you read the label, make sure that, those products, especially if you're going to be banding, to make sure that you have a tetanus on board. Okay. Now, later in life, we might also include, once we get closer to weaning, we might include some of our respiratory bacterians, or what we call them. These are the pasturellas. So pasturellas or Haemophilus, okay, or Histophilus that we call it now. But these are our traditional pasturellas, which would be Mannheimia and Pasturella multacida, but also some of the Histophilus bacterians we might utilize as well. So those we would implement a little bit closer to weaning. So again, back to the study from recommended practices from our practicing veterinarians. Number one, at branding, 2 to 4 months of age, recommend clostridial, making sure that we have that clostridial vaccine on board. Then a 5-way viral, okay, IBR, BBD, BRSV, PI3, our traditional 5-way with the addition of a multivalent clostridial product. Now, again, with this, 88% of practicing veterinarians do recommend a modified live to give to those calves. Okay, now, how many of you actually use a growth promoting implant on suckling calves? Okay, that's always a question that I like to address with people. We do have a handful of implants, growth promoting implants, we place in the flat of the ear on the outside of the cartilage. That are they are like clockwork. Okay, we will increase our feed efficiency, we will increase our growth with no other inputs. Okay, there's no such thing as a free lunch, but this is about as close as it gets when we're talking about utilizing some of our technologies in the cattle industry. Unless somebody's not paying you to maintain a natural status or a never ever program, growth promoting implants are a fantastic way to year in and year out give these animals the response and a heavier weaning weight that we sell. Okay, anticipated results about 20 pounds. We can get a $20 to 1 return on investment. So for every dollar that you spend on an implant, you get about $20 in return. You've got 100 head of calves, you just implement your bull calves, it's about like that you turn into steers. You castrate everything, you implant everything. The increased weaning weight, it's like selling an extra calf. Okay, very, very valuable, very good return on investment. And I mentioned castration for a reason. Okay, when should we castrate? Okay, well, the rule of thumb is as early in life as possible. Okay, if you're not doing it at birth, okay, birth is a fantastic time. The longer we wait, the more detrimental it is to that animal. If you're going to do it at branding, most veterinarians recommend knife cut. The older they get, we start to have a little bit of a spread on what type of castration to utilize, whether it's banding or cutting, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Regardless, if you are going to band or if you're going to knife cut, however you're going to castrate that animal, one thing that remains true, that if it's going to be done at 2 to 4 months of age or if it's going to be done out at weaning, 97% of veterinarians recommend at least having a tetanus toxoid on board. Okay, there are some areas around the country that tetanus is very prevalent, might actually have to use some antitoxin as well. Okay, but again, at least a tetanus toxoid to be able to get that protection, make sure we don't have those tetanus issues. But it really is everything. Okay, the longer these things are attached to that calf, the more the calf is attached to them. Okay, the longer we wait, the more detrimental it is to the entire system and to that calf. Okay, so back to the what people recommend, right? What do veterinarians recommend? Most of them recommend as early in life as possible. Okay, first week of life, whenever you initially grab that calf and tag it, if that animal has no destiny to be a breeding bull, okay, it's time to castrate as early in life as possible. First time you handle them is generally the perfect time to be able to castrate them. Okay, why? What's the big issue? Why don't we wait? Well, what we've seen is just the impact of having castrated at a later age. We have 140% higher morbidity, 140% higher mortality. Okay, that is a huge loss in the overall industry. Okay, we are proud of the products that we produce, and as a cow-calf operator, our product that we produce is a calf, right? Well, if we haven't set up that calf for success, and it has this detrimental effect, all the resources that went in, all the time, the labor, the effort, that if we didn't set it up appropriately, all of that was, at a loss. Okay, so for the system, making sure that we do that as early in life as possible is really, really critical. Now, just as an example, I know some of these pictures might be a little graphic for you. So the question I always get is, and have been for the last several years, is, well, all right, Doc, yes, we understand doing it early in life as possible. But what about when I go and purchase cattle and to background or to run as stockers, and they come in and they're heavier weight and they're still intact? What is the best way? and I did a deep search into the literature, and there's not very good information to answer that question. So this past winter, we actually embarked on a study, was able to get 100 bull calves out of southern Louisiana and East Texas, ultra high risk cattle. We wanted to bring them in and represent kind of that heavier animal. What's the best way to do it? We actually conducted this study at the Kansas State Beef Stocker Unit, and we did it. It was last February. Okay, so that huge, nasty cold snap and everything else, we did it during that period of time. And we tested a couple of different methods. Our banding, the top right in this picture, we did our traditional band that we banded those animals. We also banded those animals and split the sac, split the distal scrotum. I know that is increasing in prevalence in the industry, so we wanted to test it. Also did a traditional knife cut. We used we just used a Henderson tool to split the sac, and we actually hooked it up to the Henderson where you spin the testicle off to make sure that it maintains hemostasis and it doesn't bleed. We also pulled out the old school Verdizo, the big Verdizo clamp. You had to clamp each individual, each individual cord to crush it. So these were our castration methods that we looked at. Okay. Again, regardless of the way that we did it, it's a painful procedure. And the outcomes from this, in the circumstances during the weather and everything else, is we found out a couple of different things. Number one, the more invasive the technique, the bigger impact it is on the animal, especially when the environmental constraints are not very good. So whenever we have severe cold, we have other stressors added in on those animals, the more the surgical, okay, or when we band and split the sac, due to just that added steps, was actually more detrimental. Banding was still very effective. Verdizo was effective, but I personally had trouble recommending Verdizo on these heavier animals. It's not very practical, very cumbersome. Verdizo still, I believe, has a place in young calves, but it's very difficult to accomplish appropriately in this size of bull. These were about 750 pounds whenever we castrated them. So again, that's kind of the spread is all of them, as long as we can count to 2 and remove the testicles, they're still going to be effective, but the more invasive, the bigger impact it was. Okay. Okay, recommended vaccines. This is that was branding. Then we talked a little bit about castration. Now let's talk about pre-weaning. Okay. Why would we give a booster at this time? Well, we gave an initial vaccine, and we'll talk about why we would give a booster later in life. But again, either at weaning or just before weaning, those recommendations look very similar. We're still going to give a clostridial and a 5-way viral, but we might implement the utilization of one of those pastorellas, okay, one of the bacterials. Mannheimia is the key player in bovine respiratory disease on the bacteria side. So that's when one of those bacteriums would come into place, would be either at just prior to weaning or at weaning. One thing that did shift a little bit, the closer we get to weaning, the more folks recommended a modified live versus a killed product. Now, at this point, I think a lot of people go, well, why do I have to give so many vaccines? And that's a valid question. So what we see with the immune system, especially a young immune system, and we can use these calves as the example. So a young calf, 2 to 4 months of age, has all the machinery, has the immune system that's ready to respond. We give a vaccine. Not always do we see a huge, robust response, okay? Due to its immune system being underdeveloped, okay, it's still growing, it's still developing. The first vaccine is generally a primer. That's the way I like to think about it. Is it exposes the immune system, we build some memory, but we don't get a huge response. Okay, so that's why we would come back at a later time to give a booster. Now, when we give that booster, just these lines represent the amount of response, the amount of antibody production after a vaccine. The first vaccine, we get, a mediocre response, kind of a low level. But after we give the second exposure, the second shot, that's where we see this big response. We call it an amnestic response. So we have a much more reliable response in those animals. The other reason why we would give more than one vaccine, especially to these young calves, is not all of our animals respond to vaccines the same way. Okay, and if you look at this bell-shaped curve, we start over, and this is our population, so to speak. Okay, we have some animals, unfortunately, we have a small population that their immune system just doesn't respond. They just don't respond to the vaccine. Okay, we have the other end of the spectrum where we give one vaccine and boy, they just have a huge response. They build all this antibody. They have a lot of protection. Those are both pretty rare. Okay, our goal is to have most animals having a moderate response, a reliable response. But the fact of the matter is, we give vaccines on a population basis. Not each of those individuals will respond the exact same way. So that goes back to the realistic expectation that just because we administered it doesn't mean that the animal each and every animal responds like we expect it to. So realistic expectation. Now weaning. Okay, I don't think we need to debate, but weaning is a stressful situation. For these young calves, we have a change in social behavior. Okay, we separate them from mom. Okay, we have a change in nutritional status. Closer to weaning age, they're not getting a ton from their mother's milk, but it is still a change. They're learning grazing behavior from their mother as they're going on. They're consuming, getting a lot of calories by weaning time from the pasture setting. But it's the social structure. Okay, it's that maternal bond that they have with their mom. We separate that. It's a stressful time. We see the same thing in people. You see the parents dropping kids off at kindergarten. The first time, the parents are bawling outside. The kids are running around in circles, bawling on the inside. Nobody knows what's going on. We kind of see the same thing in weaning with our cows. Right? It's a stressful situation. But there are ways that we can decrease that stress, right? And that can take a lot of different forms. Any and all of these things help. The first thing we can talk about a little bit is soft weaning. You hear that terminology a lot in the industry, is soft weaning. Now, what does soft weaning actually mean? Fence line weaning could potentially be a piece of that, where you need pretty good fencing and pretty good structure put in place, which isn't always practical. But essentially, we separate cows and calves where they can visualize, they can still see each other, they can stand next to each other, but they are physically separated by the fence. Okay, so we get the calves on a different plane of nutrition. We might be supplementing them, but they still have access. They can still see that maternal bond. After about a week, they kind of forget about mom. They're kind of in their own little social group with their cohorts and their pen mates, and we decrease that stress over time. The other soft weaning program is kind of a two-stage wean. And I don't know how many people have seen the nose flaps. And this does mean that we have to work the cattle prior to weaning. We pull the calves in, we place these nose clips, and they're just little flappers. So it interferes the ability that they can no longer nurse. Some of them actually have little plastic spikes on them that is uncomfortable for the cow. So the cow actually kicks the calf off and weans the calf before we actually physically separate. But again, that takes another trip through the chute. We can only leave them in for a short period of time, maybe about 10 days. You leave them in too long, it can cause some sores on the inside of the nose. But some other management that can be utilized is just acclimating calves to their new environment. Okay, and I think this goes underutilized. Simple things of just exposing these calves to their new environment with their mom by their side before we physically separate them can go a long way. So it's no longer new. They know where the water is. They know where the feed is. They have gotten used to that new area. So potentially we can move the cows and the calves into some of these weaning areas. And then instead of weaning off the calves, we wean the cows off. We haul the cows off and we leave the calves in the area that they are accustomed to. So just some thoughts, and it's okay to think outside the box of just any way that we can decrease the stresses on these animals in that critical period of time can really go a long way. And I think last and not least, we can't forget about some of the other stressors. We didn't really talk about it here today, but that's another topic. But taking care of parasites, internal and external parasites, they rob our production. They steal nutrients from our animals, and that is still a critical piece on maintaining the productivity of those animals, especially post weaning, is making sure that we have those animals properly dewormed. We also can't forget about coccidiosis. Coccidiosis is a protozoal parasite. All cattle harbor at least a little bit of coccidia. It's usually triggered by stressful events. Usually just right around weaning. We'll see bloody diarrhea. We'll see rectal straining. They're straining to defecate. So again, coccidiosis, we need to be prepared. Whether we're feeding an ionophore, which are a coccidiostat like Menencin or Lacelicid, Bovatec or Rumensin, we can feed some of those coccidiostats. We also need to be prepared with treatments. If you're keeping these animals and weaning them, we might have to use some products like Cordid or Decox to be able to feed for a period of time, or administer in the water to be able to control coccidiosis, truly treat some of those active cases. So be prepared for coccidiosis coming into weaning period. And then externals, okay, flies, ticks, they rob our production. It's something we always try to combat. But with that, Rod, thank you for allowing me to still connect with your producers and discuss some of this calf health. And just to apologize, we couldn't do it in person. But with that, I'm finished up.
Well, thank you, AJ. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your morning this morning to visit with us. You give us a lot of really good information. I really enjoyed the parts that you talked about, the stresses, and maybe some of the giving us some options too, so that was really, really good. I appreciate it. And AJ, thank you very much for spending your morning with us.
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you.